Now, tomorrow, the Finance Minister, Ken Ofori-Atta, will present the 2020 budget in Parliament. Last year, around this time, he made us aware of government's intentions for the next 12 months, which ends today. Today is the last day of those 12 months. Government promised to provide support, incentives to local manufacturers to improve their competitiveness. Government promised a total of 1,250 communities that will be connected to the national grid. The Finance Minister spoke about tax incentives, construction of major roads, so much. And today, as we say goodbye to that budget, to those 12 months, I thought perhaps we ought to do a quick review, let you in on what has been achieved by this government in that period of time, what hasn't been achieved, how well they've done against their targets, and so forth. So we can put it all to bed and look to the future when we hear the budget tomorrow. So our guests today, joining us very soon, Pauline Anaman is a senior policy analyst with ACEP. In the studio with us, Ebenezer Taki-Obli is a development analyst. He's got a great background of finance, so he's going to be able to help us understand a lot of those issues. We'll be hearing from Edward Karewe. He's with the General Agriculture Workers Union. Also from an educationist, the Association of Ghana Industries will also be joining us, as well as a few other stakeholders. So we've got a lot to talk about. You can join the conversation. Don't forget to let us know what you think. On Facebook, we're JoyNews on TV. On WhatsApp, it's 0540-109-009. Get talking, get texting, and get contributing. All right. So, nice to see you, Mr. Obli. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Too much time. Perhaps we'll start with what we heard him say about trade and commerce.
Yeah.
There were a number of things that I highlighted. I went through the budget, and we noticed a few things. In fact, our producer, Eko Sam, made a lovely list here for us. Let's go through what he found. Introduction of tax stamps for locally manufactured as well as imported textiles. We heard that that would happen. Introduction of a single dedicated entry corridor for imported textile products. Implementation of a textile import management system to coordinate all imports of textiles, including the vetting of designs and logos. Providing support and incentives to local manufacturers to improve their competitiveness. This was across all sectors, not just textiles. Attracting foreign textile manufacturing companies to locate in Ghana. Also conducting market surveillance exercises by Textile Task Force to monitor compliance with the new policy measures. And finally, they said they would continue to deepen the promotion of regional and what word is this? Regional and intra-regional trade, and apply WTO arrangements, as well as exploring other bilateral and multilateral protocols for the promotion of domestic industries, and intensify business outsourcing and subcontract. So many expressions in there. I wonder what they all mean, but basically there was a lot around the area of textiles.
Yeah.
How much of that have we achieved?
Well, I've gone through the mid-year, and I think on the basically on all of this processes or all of these policies were basically geared towards increased revenue, rationalization, and of course tightening up loopholes. If you look at the mid-year budget, it seems some of the measures are beginning to work for government. The figures that I've looked at, the government is not really, is not totally off mark in terms of revenue for first half of the year, and I think that most of the measures are yielding results. We are hoping to see what the outturn will be. Looking at, comprehensive the entire budget review for, when tomorrow the budget is being read. So I think government is on course, but not totally out of the woods. Yeah.
All right. Now, we know that they are a little bit behind targets on revenue, tax revenue. But they're still optimistic of meeting their target by the end of the year?
Yeah, if, of course, you should be optimistic as a government.
But is it realistic to think they will make it?
Well, I don't think they will entirely achieve the target, but it's good as a government to have an optimistic outlook in terms of your revenue. And also taking into consideration the fact that we are going into an election year.
Right.
So you should be looking at ways in which you could generate more revenue to spend. And of course, they are looking at political outcomes.
Yeah.
So every smart government will look at ways in which they could increase revenue, and then basically looking at ways in which they could spend in the election year. It's something they should be optimistic about. So, and for all of us as citizens, we should encourage the government to also be optimistic in terms of revenue.
So this morning I was making the comment about revenue that 80% of our economic population is the informal sector.
Yeah.
Only 20% is identified, and out of the 20%, an even smaller percentage still actually pays tax.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the majority of our economic population is paying no tax.
Yeah.
This is a problem that no government has yet been able to solve.
Yeah.
What do we know about this government's efforts in that direction? What have they tried, and why is it still failing?
Well, I think in terms of having a forward-looking policy or vision towards formalizing the economy, this government is a bit ahead. For example, now they are trying to find a way in which almost everything you do, your TIN number will be incorporated in it. And once your TIN number is incorporated, or they find a way to get every citizen to have a TIN number, you are opening an account, you have a TIN number, you are setting up a business, you are registering with your TIN number. That is a way of basically tracking your citizens and tracking who is paying tax and who is not paying tax. And it also provides some legitimacy in terms of what the citizen is able to do and what the citizen is able to expect from the government. So in terms of that, I see some forward-looking approaches. There's also the issue of the digital addressing system. I think if we're able to really look at that policy well, that is a very good way of tracking citizens and tracking people who are supposed to pay taxes. Such business, I mean, these are businesses that are mostly concentrated in areas that look a bit congested and a bit not too organized.
Unplanned.
Yes. You know, but if you're able to find a way to get through to such players, you are basically able to find a way to also get something from such.
There's a criticism of the TIN number system that, yes, the theory is sound. This is a way of identifying every business entity, every business unit, but not necessarily a way of determining whether they are paying tax.
Yeah.
So if I have a TIN number, I can open a bank account, but the bank will not stop me from opening the account if I owe tax.
Yeah.
So I could have a TIN number, never pay tax, and still be able to access, all of these facilities.
Yeah.
So there is a suggestion that the policy only goes halfway, towards solving the problem.
I think if you look at the National Identification Project, there's that component in there. Now imagine that over a period we're able to roll out the National Identification Project, and in it your TIN is there, and that is a much more broadened identification system. Now going forward into the future, if you go in to use that particular identification to make payments or to undertake transactions, there will be a way in which, of course, once your TIN number is there, there should be a system. I don't know how, but I mean, this is a policy we have to be looking at in the long term, your team number should be able to give at least an idea through that particular integrated system of identification as to whether you are paying taxes or not. What I would suggest, which most people will not be happy, probably we should begin to look at, for example, number one, how do we track, how do we create a proper spatial development system? The informal system you are talking about is because we don't have planned communities. We don't have a planned city. We don't have a planned business areas. So maybe we should begin to also look at, because look, people don't look at it from this angle that spaces create our GDP. Our GDP is a product of spaces. So the amount of space you're able to create for businesses to grow determines the productivity and ultimately your GDP. So when you take spatial development serious, and you have local authorities or you have a proper spatial development, then it's easy to track because you know where A is and you know where business B is. You know, so I think going for in the long term, we should also look at spatial development in terms of how we organize our communities, business areas, and all of that. New developments that are coming out, we should find a way to organize communities in such a way that it's easy to know where businesses are. And once you know where businesses are, it's easy to track your taxation, you know. So I think we should look at, of course, a comprehensive national identification system, look at a social credit system, sort of. China is beginning to develop something similar to that, where, for example, if you fail to live up to your obligations as a citizen, there's a way the state can determine that. For example, in China currently they are experimental or piloting something, a social credit system where if you haven't particularly paid your taxes and you go into, say, board a train and they input your name, the system generates your data as to whether you have paid all relevant taxes. And if you haven't paid all relevant taxes or you haven't lived up to your obligations as a citizen, what happens?
You'll not be allowed.
You will not be allowed, or you pay more than what those who have lived up to their obligations. This is, of course, some people think it's a social re-engineering program, but I think we should begin to look at some type of model around allowing the state or allowing people to benefit from the state as a result of good behavior.
Fascinating thought.
And all of those other measures. Okay. So there are a lot of ways in which we can I think in this country, one of the problems we've always had is how to make everybody pay his fair share of taxes. But that calls for very serious thinking. You know, very serious thinking.
Let's to sort of scope the rest of our conversation. Let's have a look at the general overview as was presented in the last budget by the finance minister. Let's just check this out. Yeah, quite a lot was said, and that's not all. There's so much more. We want to have a bit of a discussion around what was said, what's been achieved, what hasn't been achieved, and perhaps why. And of course, we have one more guest with us. We're very happy that she's able to join us all the way from ACEP. And of course, it's Pauline. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Excellent. So we were talking about you before you came. I can just confess that quickly. And we thought you would be particularly interested in what we've been saying about tax.
Okay.
Of course, the untaxed is such a huge proportion of the economic population, 80%. But even the 20 that we are aware of, that are sort of in the formal sector, are we, or in this past year, has the government maximized revenue collection from the formal 20%?
Okay, thank you so much, Kojo, for having me here. And before I answer that, I want to say that taxation is very important to our work in ACEP, because we know that even though we focus on the natural resources sector, we know that the sector has its own limitations, right? Extraction would get exhausted eventually, and we would still fall on the taxes. We need taxes to cushion the economy every time. So we have even done some work in taxation, especially on tax evasion. And from our findings, we have seen that over the years, for a long time, the data shows that formal sector direct taxes keep increasing, indirect taxes dwindle. And so it shows how the impact of our informal sector is having on our taxation as a whole. And we have done a lot of, we've done work in last year and this year. We have a whistleblower platform where we have received evidence, hardcore evidence about companies, including Chinese companies, evading taxes in Ghana, huge sums of money. That we have reported to GRA for them to take action. And up till now, we've not seen any progress with that. And now the Auditor General has taken it up. But this GRA should be the one interested in chasing this money, but they are not as, we don't see them putting priority on this as the Auditor General has. So it's just our experience with this shows that, well, there's something worse happening in the area when it comes to tax collection. Here is the case where you have the evidence, you have everything, use it and take the money, and nothing is happening. So I leave you to decide on what you think will be happening.
Can you give us some detail of some of the evidence you found?
No, I don't have but I can give that to you later.
Certainly,
so
I'd be very interested. So you gave the example of Chinese companies. Are there quite a lot of multinationals that fall into this bracket?
Okay, because it is a whistleblower, I won't pretend to know the full details, because not everybody in ACEP gets to see it.
Right.
Okay, so I would desist from making any statement on it.
All right, but what you can say is that this information has been passed on to the GRA.
Yeah.
How long have they been in possession of this information?
This is months or close to a year.
Wow, and no action yet.
Yeah.
There's also the issue of tax breaks, and I'd like to bring Mr. Obley in on this as well. This is not, illegal evasion of tax. This is just the state deciding not to tax certain entities, and there's some criticism of that policy, that perhaps we overdo it, and that we give a little too much leeway to foreign companies, particularly when it comes to what tax, import duties, and so forth, to pay. What's your assessment of this?
I think I was one of the few people who advocated that government needed to take a comprehensive look at the exemption regime. For example, the exemptions around the free zones, for example. We wanted a free zones program that would basically attract investments. If you look at that particular project, it's almost since 1999. It's time for us to look at what kind of benefits we are giving to free zones companies, because we've grown enough, we are producing oil, the economy has, growth is is no more what it used to be, and we need more revenue to basically do what? Undertake development. And if you have such a project close to 2 decades, it's time for you to sit and to say, okay, you know what, guys operating in this sector, we are willing to make these compromises for you. Because the policy has got, a lot of companies have come in. Ghana is becoming, I mean, globally, one of the very attractive investment destinations. So it's not like we are now a beginner nation in terms of stuff like this, or Ghana is not known. We have credentials. We've built so much global credibility. So therefore, the exemptions we are giving to companies around the free zones area, we should be looking at it. Also, the mining area, I'm sure you guys have looked at natural resource management and issues around mining. In the 2019 budget, there's a proposal for a mining investment fund of sorts. And the idea was to convert the exemptions that some of the mining companies were enjoying into some type of shares, you know, so that government begins to take some ownership,
right,
you know, benefits as just leaving them as exemptions and allowing the mining companies to enjoy. You know, so I think government had a forward-looking idea in terms of the mining industry. But as a government, I think it's important that the government begins to review the broad exemption regime, the kind of exemptions we are giving to companies and all kinds of individuals. We have to sit down and look at it.
Right.
Even importation by government officials and some of the nonsense that is going on in the port. I mean, we have to look at it, because the mere fact that you're a state official or some part of the setup doesn't mean that when you are important stuff, you should be given. You know, everybody should pay his fair share of you know, taxes. You know, so I think
Pauline, let's focus a bit more on energy, as Ebenezer has brought up. And by the way, Pauline Anaman, of course, is senior policy analyst at ACEP. Yeah, so energy, and all of these firms who are enjoying these massive tax breaks, and yet the roads that lead to the towns in which they operate, horrible. People are demonstrating all the time, and we keep getting this impression that when they are taking without giving enough back, whether through taxes or through developing communities.
So I think I'll take off from where Mr. Taki ended. So we are currently at ACEP looking at tax exemptions and what the cost and benefits have been for government. As he mentioned, there's a policy and there's an intention to that policy. It is supposed to ensure that there is more investment, more that leads to economic boom, employment, etc. But the question is, have we achieved that, and should we review that policy? I believe a lot in data, and ACEP does so too, right? So what we are doing currently is to look at the various contracts in the mining. We are focusing on mining, the mining industry, and to see the policies that led to the contracts, the provisions in the contract that allowed for tax exemptions. We match that to see whether companies are actually achieving, through the tax exemptions, we are actually achieving what we intended to achieve with the exemptions, and then make policy recommendations about any changes that need to be done. So that is what we are doing. Another thing we are doing is to review the Minerals Income Investment Act. He also mentioned that as well, right? And our main motivation for doing that is that the mining sector has been in existence for a long time, but there has been no evidence about how the revenues from the sector, including taxes, are being invested like it is happening in the oil and gas sector. And we've advocated for a Mineral Revenue Development Act, right? But then we got to a certain stage and then it stopped because there was a policy shift, and then the MIIA, the Mineral Income Investment Act, was quickly passed. to change the whole. So now it's no longer like going to be like the oil and gas sector, where you know that this is the amount we are getting and this is what is being invested in roads and infrastructure, this and that and that. It's like a special purpose vehicle, and then government can use it for anything, including debt financing and all, attracting more income and all of that to the country. And so we are reviewing that act to see the shortfalls in that act and what is also good about the act, and also make policy recommendations, because we believe that if the act is good and if the act is beefed up, it can help us with our taxation planning as well.
So at the moment, I mean, government doesn't really own shares in any of the mining companies, does it? Does it own significant shares?
None that I know of.
Right. So our revenue in mining is just tax. Is that right?
We have royalties also from mining.
Of course.
There are various sources of income from mining industry. We have the surface rentals. We have the corporate income taxes, of course. We have the royalties. We have the rent that people pay to the OSL, to the GRA, etc. So there are different sources of revenues to government from mining. But the problem is that the only portion of the revenue that is accounted for everybody to see is now the royalties. Okay, and that is only 20% of the total royalty that is given, and that is under the Mineral Development Fund Act. The rest, the 80% of the royalties, together with the corporate income taxes, the surface rentals, and every income that comes from mining, is going to the mineral income, the fund, Mineral Income Investment Fund. And that is what I have described. It is a special purpose vehicle. It can be invested outside the country. Government can fall on that to borrow. But the question is, how do we put in the mechanisms in place to ensure that we, the citizens, are enjoying the benefits as we are enjoying from the oil and gas industry? So for now, that act is not even very operational. So,
as we are enjoying from the oil and gas industry, I was tempted to ask, are we enjoying from the oil and gas industry? In a moment, we will shift to education as well, where lots of plans were made at the beginning of the year, and we'll see how far along we are with those plans. We'll be speaking to Executive Director of the Institute for Educational Studies, Peter Pate-Enti, who joins us via Skype. Peter, good to see you. Thank you so much for making the time. That's in just a moment, but I want us to wrap up a bit more on energy and oil and gas and so forth, because I mean, you brought it up. So as at 2018, the total amount of money that Ghana had made from oil and gas since we discovered it wasn't a lot more than 3 billion. 3 billion.
No, like 5 billion.
About 5 billion by 2018 dollars. Okay, so today, when we hear organizations like the organization that's supposed to check how the oil money is spent, PIAC, raising major issues about how institutions like GNPC spend money and so forth. Let's look at what the last budget said we would be able to do with our oil and gas revenue. How do you assess our performance? Today's the last day. How do you assess our performance, against the targets that we set on how we were going to spend our oil money?
Okay, so we have priority areas that were defined as far back as 2017, and it runs to 2020. And the priority areas are to invest petroleum revenues in education, in health, in agriculture, in roads and other critical infrastructure, right? And so far, that is what the government has been doing. But majority of the money has gone into education, which is through the free SHS. And we have also seen monies go into infrastructure development, into agric, especially irrigation projects, and then to the health sector, also health infrastructure. So far, the investments have gone just the way as has been planned.
Right.
No two ways about that. But the question we should be asking is whether or not we are achieving the impacts of our investments as espoused in Section 21(2) of the PRMA. So that is the question. Unless we do that, I cannot say anything about whether we are achieving anything. We are spending the money.
You were going to give us the answer.
We are spending the money.
Yeah.
Right.
And how's the impact?
So I can speak to the impacts from our previous value for money analysis, but for this particular year, we have not done a new value for money analysis because there's a lot of backlog to even clear, right? And this is also the responsibility of the Ministry of Finance, PIAC, and other state institutions to monitor how the monies invested are impacting the economy, right? So from our previous value for money analysis, we have seen that there's both positive and negative impacts, right? The negative projects don't get completed on time. Projects don't get consistent funding. There's also, like, you could see that some of the contract sums are fishy. Some projects don't exist, etc. But we've also seen the positive side as well. We've seen how, like, irrigation projects are improving productivity in some areas like Kayime in the Volta region. For that particular project, we followed it from the time the money was sent, when the dam was being constructed. We went there to look at the impacts, the social, economic, environmental impacts on people. And then we advocated for consistent funding. The following year, there was more funding to complete the project. And after completion, we went back again to see how it is impacting. And people are able to farm all year round, and it has improved on incomes. So there are positive, we are seeing good impacts, but also there are also the negative aspects that require a lot of monitoring.
Ebenezer, just before we go to Peter, quickly, give me an assessment of government's accountability when it comes to how we use oil money. I mean, we have the institutions that are giving us information, PIA, ACEP. They basically have this 24/7 clock that you can go to a website and it will tell you how the oil money is being spent and all that. So as for the information, we have it. We see where they are doing well, and we see where they are doing badly. But does anybody get penalized? Does anything get corrected? Does anything change as a result of what we're learning about how they're spending our money?
Well, I think if you ask the members of PIAC, they will tell you how frustrated they are even getting data. So I'll speak from what the information I have, and the information is that we are trying our best to spend, but there are a lot of uncompleted projects littered across the country that are not being finished. There are also some funds, PIAC is struggling to actually find out where they are. They've tracked, they've been able to analyze the various budgets since we started producing oil, and there are funds that they can't really account as to where those funds have gone into. And there's also the issue, what we can analyze from basically where we can find out whether the oil is being used or not is the ABFA, which is the annual budget funding amount, and that is where we can track. Government is doing its best. For me, what I recommend this government for is that they are pushing a lot of that into the senior high school education. And for me, I think that is a good thing, because then you are looking at more of a generational investments than just some quick road projects or some quick investment here and there. Because education, for us to lift our country from the current status, we need to invest heavily in education. For me, that is one of the areas I think I would recommend this government. They should begin to shift more of that into educational funding. Because at least from now to 20 to 30 years' time, we'll begin to see some social mobility, and most of that social mobility and the ability to lift a lot of our citizens out of poverty would have been as a result of this type of social investment in terms of the free SHS and all of that. So I think if government wants to leave a proper legacy, we should begin, at least more of that investment should go into the free senior high school education, because then you are building a legendary type of system. You are building a long-term generational benefit, legacy that benefits everybody, and you are giving opportunity to a lot of citizens where they wouldn't have been one available to them. So, in the long term, we should be looking at more of that. Then because then we are able to actually account. But as for projects, once you begin to shift more, and also look at benchmark investment projects. So, for example, we can identify greenfield and brownfield projects, invest in them. So, for example, the railway from the southern sector to the northern sector. If we push oil money there, the project is completed. Everybody knows that this is what an oil money project. You can see it, you can feel it. But if you are investing in, small projects here and there, I mean, over a period, we'll not really know what the amount has been used for. So I think there should be more focus. Like this government is looking at education, pushing the resources in education, and then we should also look at long-term investment projects and all of that.
But there's a difference between spending and efficient spending.
Yeah.
Right. So if you are spending all your oil money on education, but you don't see the headway and all the impact you can report is more enrollment, then what have you achieved? Why do we educate people? Let's interrogate the details. If you are investing in education, what do you want to achieve? Is it just numbers? You get the numbers. But what are the impacts of many people going to school on the economy of Ghana? How does that impact on people's future as a country? How does that impact on the next level of education? What is the impact on infrastructure requirements? That detailed thinking requires a lot of planning, and that would automatically tell you that relying solely on oil revenue is not enough to say you are promoting intergenerational whatever through education.
Yeah. In fact, you've snatched the words right out of my mouth, because I was going to go straight to Peter with a question about the impact of all of that spending on education. Now, Peter, if you're with us, I'm sure you've been paying attention to what Pauline and Ebenezer have been saying. And I'm very curious to find out what your assessment is of the impact of almost 2 billion cedis of oil money spent on free SHS this year. I mean, the finance minister called it 1.7 billion sometime in May. So tell me, what's your assessment? Enrollment is up, but how about quality of education? We still have schools under trees. We still have a curriculum that we're struggling with, but that's actually for GHS. I'm told we've lost connection with Peter. Oh, Peter, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Good morning.
Fantastic. Good morning. So I asked a very long question there. I'm sure you missed it all, but I was simply simply trying to determine what your assessment is of the massive spending of oil money in education, almost 2 billion this year alone. So how has it impacted on the quality of education? We know enrollment is up, but what else has improved?
Okay. Thank you very much. We think that it's important that we are putting a lot of money into the education sector. As the panelist said, it's one of the best investments that you can ever do to improve your human capital base, so that from 10, 20 years to come, they will take over the economy and then run it. But one of the things that we seems to have forgotten is that when people go through education, or when you make investment, there should be unexpected returns to education. So when someone is paying his fees, at the end of the day, he wants to get employed, and then he gets paid, and that is the returns on the investment that the person made in his education. But what we are seeing is that there seems not to be a corresponding expansion in the economy to accommodate the kind of investments that we are making in the sector. So it is important we are putting money there, but there should be a conscious effort by the government to also expand the economy, so that the economy will be able to absorb the number of people we are pushing out through the free SHS system. That is one. We cannot assess the impact of the money we are putting into the education now. In terms of the quality that we would want to expect, it will be very difficult. The least that we can do is to wait for next year, where the first batch will write their WASI exams, and then we would want to see whether there's some kind of improvement in that. So that issue can be deferred to another time. But what we are thinking, when I say we, the Institute for Education Studies, IFS, what we are thinking is that we think that if we have this kind of money, then we should also be selective in the kind of the sector of education we are pushing this money into. So basically, we will not be so much interested in pushing this money into the grammar form of education. We would want to see how much we are pushing into TVET and how much we are pushing into agriculture education, especially agriculture education. And maybe we'll be coming to the budget and we'll be looking at the commitment that were made in agriculture education and how far we've been able to go. But if we have that kind of money, I think that it is time that the government refocuses or channels these resources into improving the state of agriculture education across the length and breadth of the country, because we have faculties in our university that runs agriculture programs. So what are we doing to agriculture education at the basic level, at the senior high school level? What are we doing to agriculture education? What is the state of our TVET education? There are a lot of things going on there, but how committed are we in pushing money there? So yes, I agree, and it is important that we put a lot of money into education, but we should be very, very selective, that we put money into educational sectors that will make the students self-employed than rather to train them in the grammar form of education and they come out and we're still looking for a job.
So Peter, let me ask you this. I'm interested in your assessment of government's ability to plan when it comes to the education sector. I ask this because there have been several things that suggest that perhaps they are a bit more reactionary than, proactive. For example, when free SHS was announced, they came out after 1 year, all of a sudden we had the double track system, which certainly was not part of the plan from day one. Then we have the rollout of a new curriculum, which has been ongoing now for almost a full term. We've gone past half term already, and we still don't have textbooks. Certainly that can't have been part of the plan. We have currently with free SHS, we have tertiary institutions that we've turned into technical universities from polytechnics, yet they are offering grammar courses, and there is nothing happening at SHS level to create undergrads who will actually go and study technical programs. So there doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence of forward thinking, but maybe I'm an outsider. You're an insider, Peter. Tell us, how well is the government planning in the education sector?
I must admit that a lot of things are going on in the education sector. 2 years ago, we talked about what we call policy coherence, and that was when the debate about, I think 3 years ago, the debate about the conversion of polytechnic into technical universities came into being. What we were thinking was that if you are converting the polytechnics into technical universities, then you have to also make sure that your technical and vocational institutes are up and running, so that those students will feed into the technical universities. And that actually didn't happen. We were thinking that going forward, a lot of investment will go into that sector, and they will feed into the technical universities. As at now, I might not be able to say for sure that a lot of investment have gone into the technical and vocational education. So a lot of things are happening. We just hope that at the end of the day, I spoke to one of the people in authority, and he made a point that the education sector is like an octopus, and a whole lot of things can happen at the same time. But what is important is that there should be geared towards a particular goal. So we are all hoping that at the end of the day, all the things that are happening at the various sectors would all lead to improving quality education at our basic level, at our senior high school level, and also ensure that our tertiary students are fit for the job market. That is what we'll be able to say, because it will be difficult for us to assess or say that the policies will not yield any results while some of them are still running. I agree with you. Something like the double track was a policy that came in because of a challenge that they faced. But I was thinking, or we were thinking, that if we had step back a little and analyze or look at the projection in the growth of enrollment over the years, we would have been able to deal with that particular problem. But then we had to come out with a policy that would help to solve that problem. I also agree with you that in terms of the textbooks for the curriculum implementation, by now we should have the textbooks. We have said that even the General Education Service recognize that one of the inputs of quality education is textbook, and they mark it at 1-to-1. So every student should have a textbook. So anybody who comes to downplay the role of textbooks in ensuring quality education means that he does not even understand what goes into quality education. And as
Peter,
now,
are you saying that the education minister doesn't understand what goes into education?
I've not heard the education minister talk about that. So
you haven't?
I don't. Yes, please, I haven't.
Who have you heard?
But what I'm saying, yeah, maybe some of them, but I don't know. The point I'm making is this: that when you look at the input variables of quality education, according to the Ghana Education Service, one of the key variables is textbook. Another one is classroom. Another one is DEX. Then we talk about teachers. Teacher-student ratio. We talk about all those things. So if the student is not having the textbook, it means that the inputs that are supposed to be present for the student to acquire quality education, one of them is missing. And you cannot downplay the role of textbooks in education. I think I've heard the PR of the Minister of Education. I've not heard the minister.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you for that, Peter. I appreciate it. Now, let's, just before we go into the power sector, which is the next area that we're going to spend a bit of time on, I think it's interesting hearing Peter talk about what the ultimate effect should be of all this money that we're spending. 1.7 billion, a lot of money. Is our oil revenue a sustainable source of funding for free SHS? It's going to be more next year, clearly. Can we sustain it?
It's obviously not sustainable. Oil and gas, like every other natural resource that is extracted, has a time frame. And within that time frame, anything can even happen with the projected production levels, right? And whatever revenue we expect is a product of quantity that is produced and the global prices. So if the companies operating in our fields project that they are going to produce maybe 100 barrels per day, and something happens to the FPSO and they end up producing 60 barrels per day, even if prices are high, it will still impact on projected revenues for the government. They may also produce more than they have projected, but if global prices of oil is low, then it also affects the revenue. So this is not a sector that we should rely on to finance something as serious as our education. That is why we have advocated in ACEP that it is important for government to seek alternative sources of funding. And that is why we are pushing for a minerals development, a minerals investment fund, like we have in the Petroleum Revenue Management Act. We should also have a Mineral Revenue Management Act that sort of does the kind of things PRMA is doing, so that we can have funding from various sources. But if we don't plan well with financing oil and financing education, and we depend so much on the oil and gas industry, then we are putting ourselves up for failure. That is all I can say for now.
Okay. Final thing on oil before we go on to power. The countries, and there are too few of them, unfortunately, the countries that have successfully developed from their oil sector, that are wealthier because they have oil, they are in the minority of oil-producing, countries. But one example is Norway, and their massive fund that they've been, building over the years. That's like real legacy. We are spending ours, and the president has, really defended that approach. He makes no apology. He says this is what we need now, so we'll spend. Should we manage expectations of the nation that at some point the oil money will run out? It's not a legacy asset. It's pocket money. We're spending it. It'll finish.
Yeah, I think yes, we need to manage expectations, but more importantly, we need to begin to look. I'm sure you guys have looked at the contract regime. We need to begin, once we've established the fact that we have oil, we also have to look at bringing in more in terms of our share in the contracting regime. With all the contracts that are being signed, we should look at gradually moving at least 50%, 40, because if you look at the first contracts which were signed, they were basically advertisement contracts to bring in the investor. But we've established the credibility. So we have to also assert ourselves in terms of how much we are willing to take in terms of risks, and then in terms of the benefits in the contracting regime. Secondly, of course, you know, I was part of the group which kind of fought against a free-fall taxation, full-force tax-funded senior education system. I'm a conservative. I don't believe that everything should be tax-funded of sort. It should be innovative. What about looking at using, there are countries that are using the voucher system in terms of financing education. Because, of course, there are people, there are parents who are willing to pay.
So it shouldn't be free for all.
It shouldn't be free for all.
The finance minister agrees with you.
He admitted. You know, the issue is basically that in terms of policy, maybe I'm sure it's a cabinet issue. There are people who believe in a certain way there, but I don't know, there's somebody's majority opinion had to. Because in the long term, as she said, it's not sustainable. If we don't discover more oil fields, we don't find innovative ways of, expanding revenue generation, over the long term, we're going to struggle with this policy. So obviously, we need to find innovative ways. Let's look at the voucher system. Let's think around means testing, and then find a way to let students who can pay, let their parents come in a mean test. Let's identify the poor. Look at the way in which we can expand the scholarship system, and then let those who really deserve to benefit. Those who can pay. Let's look at the entire project going forward. There are very good models across the world where, there are different ways in which education is being funded. Full tax funded, no, I don't agree, but I like the policy.
But while we do the means testing, we have to ensure that we are not introducing favoritism and people who into the system, because already there's the LEAP program that is targeted at the poor, but even within that you could see that some people get it because they are party people. That thing shouldn't even be for investing in education if you are doing means testing.
Okay, right. Let's talk power in the time we have left, and it's been one I've been looking forward to. This year, I'll let you approach the subject in your own way, but I suppose the big issue that nobody can miss is the fact that we were supposed to be under a concession. We were supposed to be under a concession. Pauline, we are not. As far as missing targets go, that's a big one, isn't it?
It's a very big one. And, the whole essence of this concession was to address inefficiencies, the very inefficiencies that bring our debt issue, the debt of the utilities, and therefore power generation issues and energy access and tariff costs. Like, it has a very rippling effect on various other things, right? So the concession was supposed to address that inefficiency to ensure that the sector is okay. And if the power sector is okay, everything else will fall in place. But here we are, back to square one, having spent a lot of money on procuring the concessionaire and all of that. So it is very disappointing. That is true. But that also means that our utilities is now back to the hands of ECG. ECG must now set up. It means that ECG must behave like the concessionaire.
Is that a realistic expectation?
It is possible.
Has anything been added or subtracted from ECG to make them behave differently from the way they did before the concessionaire came in?
So there was a statement from PDS some time ago describing how over time they have been able to achieve certain things. And remember that this PDS is just about the management. It is the same ECG people who are in there, the same technical people, and they were able to cut some costs, recover some monies and all of that. So for me, it tells me that it's very much possible for ECG to do what the concessionaire should have done. But the question is, how can ECG raise $580 million for investment in the next 5 years, like the concessionaire was asked to do. Is ECG able to do that?
How? Through which mechanism?
I don't know. I don't know. So, yeah, that is something the Minister of Finance should be telling us in the budget, how ECG is going to manage this whole thing amidst the failure of the concession. Yeah, I expect the Finance Minister to tell us.
Wow. I'll take your thoughts on
Well,
that.
I think what she said is right. Look, the issue in the first place was this political gambitry we are playing with our state-owned institutions. If government had paid all it owed ECG, we wouldn't have even been discussing this kind of issues. Now, in the first place, you are owing the entity. If you pay the entity, it's the same people. Even the concessionaire or whatever. I mean, if they had come and they had raised the needed fund, it was the same stuff, the same people, because we advocated that we shouldn't lay out these same guys. So come in, pay your debt, let the entity run as it's supposed to run, and we'll be okay. Because you are the one cause crippling the same government. I mean, it's government. If I say government, not MPP, it's both MPP and DC. They have crippled the state entity by their failure to pay what is owed the entity. So pay the entity, let the entity start, come back on its feet, and we'll be good to go. If you need additional investment, of course, I support a private. I'm a private sector person. If I get the opportunity, I'll even privatize the whole government. So I believe in private sector.
They will arrest you for plotting through government.
I'm not a fan of government. Anything managed by government, I'm not a fan. So I believe they should find a way to bring in another private player, because then profitability gains will create efficiency and all of those things. Once the private sector guys come in, they'll be able to manage ECG the way it's supposed. And all these political play games with ECG will die down, because at the end of the day, the private man is not looking at your nepotism and your family trying to push people in. No, they are looking at creating, building a business, making profit, and expanding the business. So I think in the long term, whilst ECG is back, they should investigate what the concessionaire did, whatever monies were taken and all of that. But in the long term, we should be looking at bringing in a private player.
Then the critical thing to do is to invest. Because there are technical challenges that require massive investment. ECG does not have that money. So when he talks about bringing in a private person, that is where
that's value what they are coming from.
Yeah, to invest monies in equipment, to invest monies in metering system, and also monitoring. There are also commercial losses. Okay. So the technical losses, you have challenges with your equipment and you lose so much power that you produce. So you don't even have the money from, you can't sell the power you lose. You have lost it in the system. And then there's the commercial loss where people tap into their power. Government also doesn't pay, but if you have a private person, they can immediately do that without thinking about, oh, this is government and all of that, so we have to be careful how we do things. They will just take their money because it affects their bottom line. That is the essence of a private person. But if ECG can do at least the commercial side, address the commercial challenges by going aggressively on government, going aggressively on people, to take the money that is due, tracking the consumption, knowing where power goes and following it up and collecting the money. If they are efficient in that way, even in that respect, you could make some savings in the short term.
What a dream.
ECG, I think ECG is capable of doing that. As I mentioned, ECG staff, both technical and non-technical, were the people working with PDS to achieve.
Private company.
Yes,
so
but
no one in government could pick up a phone and say, "Don't go and collect your money from this state institution."
But look, there are state institutions in other countries who have performed well like a private entity. ECG can be like that. It is possible.
Okay, it will work out well for everybody if they actually manage to do that. If they can, that's another matter. But for me, I'm eternally amused by those who actually praise government for how this concession agreement ended. You know, there are people who say we established our sovereignty, we exerted our sovereignty. Well, if we are a sovereign nation, then maybe the 310 million that we've collected from America, we should go and give it back to them. All right, okay, so let's wrap up this way, okay? And I'll start with you on Skype, Peter. Tell me one thing that you are expecting to hear tomorrow when the finance minister reads the budget. One thing. I'll come around and get one from everybody. Starting with you, Peter.
One thing. Concrete steps by the government to, one, erode the double track system or abolish the double track system, and also plans to show how the various tertiary institutions would absorb the number of students who will be coming out from SHS in next year. So it means that infrastructure development, massive infrastructure development at the various university campuses, and then maybe an alternative plan to support distance education so that the students would have variety in terms of their admission instead of going on residential stuff that we are not ready for now.
Thank you. So some planning is what Peter is expecting. Ebenezer?
I think this would be the election year budget. So, of course, we should expect increased spending, both social and capital investments. But I think what the government needs to do is to look at the long-term projects. Long-term projects that will transform the economy. I think they've begun to take steps. So, for example, integrated aluminum industry, steel, these are things that change economies. You know, so they should begin to have a long-term view. While they are looking at their second term, they should begin to have a long-term view about changing the structure of the economy. And these are the big things we need to do: automobile, steel, aluminum, and stuff like that. These are things that transform economy. It's not the micro stuff that we are currently experiencing. If they don't look at the long-term projects, I mean, we'll just be doing, you know, what we call pork barrel politics.
Right.
Just invest to satisfy your political constituents for the next election campaign. Right. But we should be looking at the long term.
So I will focus on the extractive sector, energy, that's oil and gas, power and mining. So for the power sector in particular, we all see the challenges we are facing. And from the supplementary budget that was read, the Ministry of Finance made it clear that we have excess capacity. And as a result of excess capacity, we are paying a lot of capacity charges that for power plants that we are not even using. And so his approach was to renegotiate some of the power purchase agreements. Right. So in this budget, what we would want to see is for the finance minister to live up to his words, because he mentioned that it was going to start on 1st August, and up to now we have not seen anything like that, of cancelling some power purchase agreements that are bringing in a lot of capacity charges. We have cautioned the government that, you know, doing so abruptly without proper engagement and proper audit to see which power plants to cut off would be dangerous to the state in terms of judgment debt and all of that, because it's a contract you entered into. So we expect that the finance minister will show us how he's going to reduce the cost, the debt in the energy sector by telling us which particular power purchase agreements they are going to renegotiate, or the progress they have made, so that we know that at some point in the future we are going to enjoy some reduced tariffs, etc. Right. And also, that also leads me to the gas sector. We have a lot of gas in the country, right? The minister in his previous budget, the supplementary one, he mentioned that by 2023 we'll be consuming about 750 million standard cubic feet of gas per day. But if you look at the projections from the World Bank and even by our own work, by 2023, Ghana will be needing about 450 scarf, you know, to 550 scarf of gas. That means that there is an excess that we have already procured that are also take or pay agreements that we will not be using. So we expect that the minister will tell us how he's going to cut off that excess for us to save money. Because from his estimation, that would mean that from 2020, we'll be paying like $450 million every year, you know, for gas that is not consumed. That is not sustainable. So they should renegotiate. Now, in the oil and gas sector, we have been very keen on monitoring petroleum contracts and how companies are delivering. And we have seen that a lot of blocks are lying idle. Now, from our monitoring, we saw that the deputy minister for energy at the Oil Week, Africa Oil Week in South Africa mentioned that there are some contracts that they want to cancel upstream, which we think is a good thing to do. So we expect the Minister of Finance to tell us how these things are going to happen.
Wonderful.
And then the mining sector.
Oh, gosh.
The mining sector, there has to be a Minerals Revenue Management Act. It's serious. We don't need to take lightly what is happening in that sector. So the government should pick it up again.
Wonderful. Pauline, Ebenezer, and Peter, thank you all so much for your wonderful contribution.